welcome to Virtual Investor Conferences. On behalf of OTC Markets, we are very pleased you've joined us for the Small Cap Growth Conference. Our next presentation of the day is from BacTech Environmental. Please note you may submit questions for the presenter in the box to the left of the slides. You can also view a company's availability for one-on-one meetings by clicking Book a Meeting. At this point, I am very pleased to welcome Ross Orr, President and Chief Executive Officer of BacTech Environmental, which trades on the OTCQB venture market under the symbol BCCEF, and on CSE under the symbol BAC. Welcome back, Ross.
Thank you, Lily. Appreciate it. Good to be back. I was speaking, I think it was last October, I came and spoke at a conference in New York. BacTech Environmental, and our tagline, "Our bugs eat rocks," because that's what they do. So in the event of, for the sake of expediency here, this is a technology that's being used to replace smelting and roasting. It's an environmental approach to mining or to mineral processing, and it's very effective at dealing with arsenic. Yeah, I'm just going to move on here to et cetera. So an executive summary. So BacTech has actually built 3 plants to date globally, 2 in Australia, 1 in China. They were all licensing deals, which meant very, very little money for the company. And so we changed the format a number of years ago to start pursuing projects where we could actually obtain equity in the project itself. And that's what led us to Ecuador. We like to say that we chase arsenic and everybody else is running the other way. Miners are not happy with arsenic because obviously the perceived problems with permitting, environmental aspects, et cetera, et cetera. So we've been working on this project in Ecuador now for a number of years. All of the permits are in place. There's one small bureaucratic issue where we have to just reclassify the land that we bought from from agricultural to industrial, and that's underway right now. And finally, I'm going to touch on what we call a game-changing patent that was filed last April, which is for the processing of sulfide minerals in general to produce strategic elements and selling basically all the pieces of the pie to leave literally zero waste. Pretty exciting stuff. So we're one of 2 companies worldwide. Goldfields of South Africa has built a number, like probably 20 bioleach plants to date. We've built 3. But the focus on all of those plants predominantly is that it's arsenopyrite, which is the type of ore that is being processed because of the fact that we produce a stable form of arsenic as a byproduct. As Lily stated, we trade on the CSE. I noticed today we traded 1 million shares. I'm not sure where that came from. And we also trade on the OTCQB, which is a quieter market, but it does allow American investors to keep their funds in US dollars. This is a picture of actually one of the plants, or the plant that we built in China. That was built in 2001, and then it was doubled in capacity in 2008. But you can see the size of the tanks. They're large, they're stainless, and that's because the environment that the bacteria live in is highly acidic. So you need something to, not corrode over the time, over the 20 years that you're running the plant. The actual process itself, concentrates are bought and brought into the plant. They go through a regrind if necessary so we can expose more of the material to the bacteria to speed up the process. As they work their way through the process, it's about a 6-day cycle. Each of the 3 large tanks have impellers that keep the material suspended in liquid so the bacteria can get at it. And at the end of the six days, you have a solid liquid separation where anything that dissolves in acids, such as base metals and of course arsenic, go in one direction, and then the now oxidized sulfides that contain the gold, silver, and PGMs go in a separate direction for conventional recovery. This is where it says here the washed oxidized solids are repulped and processed through standard agitation into a Merrill Crowe and we will produce a doré that is effectively 65% silver and 35% gold. And it's obviously quite nice to have a bump in the price of silver to add to the economics of this project, which are already very good. So the first project is Tenguel. We were alerted to the fact that the Chinese were technically the only buyers of this high arsenic gold concentrate that is produced in the area. The total tonnage is around 250 tons a day is what the export volume is that comes out of Ecuador. And we want to eventually own that business. But this area, Ponce Enriquez, has up to 100 mines, smaller mines, medium-sized mines, nothing really large like by Canadian or American standards, but very high grade. Ecuador is a jewelry box. It's very, very undermined, and it really has more issues to do with First Nations or the Aboriginals and their pushback on it. But the country is a jewelry box. There's no question about that. So we are producing, or they are producing, these high-grade gold concentrates with silver credits that are easily 2 ounces of gold per ton, but the arsenic levels can be as high as 20%. And if you skip down to the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see what that means to a miner. If he has 20% concentrates with arsenic, he's effectively going to be paid, first of all, he's going to be paid a discount because of the penalty that they apply for arsenic, but then he's going to get a further discount of 10% because of the fact that he's 10% over the requested limit for the Chinese buyers. So our goal, obviously, is to build a plant, in country. It avoids all the export taxes. It provides jobs, obviously, locally that right now are being shipped to Asia. And this is just a snapshot of what phase one of the plant looks like. We actually did a bankable feasibility study at $1,600 gold and made $11 million at that level. We've raised the capex up to 22 million, mostly just because when things boom in mining, prices go up. So effectively, we're looking at $22 million. And you can see here with the example we use is $3,800 gold. It's actually been crazy chasing the gold price up and down the ladder. I mean, we gave up at 4,000 as far as what does it mean, because it actually tends to scare people, the fact that we're making X million dollars when you get up to $5,000 gold. People just don't believe you. So with the capex you can see in the bottom right-hand corner here, at 22 million, we're producing roughly 100 ounces of gold per day, or processing, I should say. And using an example of paying 75% of the contained gold values, and again, these numbers are wrong because obviously 35,000 ounces at $5,000 is 175 million. But the OPEX, we know, because we did a bankable feasibility study and we did test work, we know that the OPEX is $215 per ton. And one of the nice things that the government did for us was they gave us a 12-year tax holiday and under what's called an international protection agreement. So it also moves any arbitration outside the country so that we don't have to get stuck in some kangaroo court that wouldn't give us a hope and heck of winning. Phase two is where things really start to ramp up. We're estimating the capex on that at about $80 million, but it will take you to roughly 125,000 ounces of gold per year. And we've lowered the grade down to 45 grams per ton because we're cherry picking the first mines that are going to be over 60 grams per ton. But we've just lowered it because as you get smaller, the grades get less, but still there's still 45 grams per ton, which is 1 ounce and 3/4. So this shows you the price of gold sensitivity. Again, I gave up at 4,000 because we just kept changing adding boxes at the bottom and removing boxes at the top. But for a conservative look at it, at $4,000 gold, the first phase generates 31.6 million. We do pay a 15% employee bonus pool tax. That's the only tax that we have right now. And so people that live in this area who've been historically have been picking the cocoa pods from the trees that grow on our property are now going to be making literally 10 times what they were going to make picking cocoa. So, obviously that went over very well in the local community. And we also actually kept the former employees on staff to make sure that those 100 acres of trees don't die and be an eyesore. And we told them you can keep the proceeds of whatever cocoa you sell. And fortunately for them, the cocoa price over the last couple of years has shot way up, and I think they did very well. And again, it went over very well from the locals' point of view. So that's the present. Oh, I guess I should back up, because the question I get every day is, where's the financing for Ecuador? And I'd like to tell you it's in my back pocket, but there are issues that we are dealing with there that that have to be talked about. One is, of course, is the narco problem. Ecuador has become fairly sketchy in the point of view of the coastal regions where the narcos have been using the ports to export their drugs to North America and Europe. That's one problem. So perception is reality, unfortunately. The other problem, of course, is that our balance sheet, although we've eliminated most of our debt, still does not support $22 million US. So we've taken the structure now to discuss with people that, put up the 22 million, you'll get a cash sweep of 80 to 85% of the cash flow, which means payback is probably less than a year. And then at which point then you would flip that into a minority position in the project itself. If we were to go out and raise $22 million in BacTech, we would look like an Australian junior with 2 billion shares outstanding. And that's not something I'm going to do to myself or to the shareholders. So I know it's frustrating. Believe me, it's not as easy as it looks, even with these numbers. And that's a reality. But we'll get it done. I just don't know. I just can't give you a finite date as to when that is. So hopefully that deals with that. So now the zero tailings. We were approached by Vale through Dr. Nadia Mikachik at Merarco in Sudbury, Ontario, to see if we could extract any value out of the tailings that Vale had been throwing out for the past 100 years, of course, before them, Inco. So there's two types of sulfide minerals in Sudbury. There's pyrrhotite, which is nasty, and there's pentlandite, which is easy to work with and much higher grade. So the pyrrhotite, which tries to oxidize itself, will literally start to smolder if you leave it out in the summertime just on the ground, because again, it's working hard to oxidize itself. So what they've been doing is separating this lower grade, 0.85 nickel, but also copper and cobalt tailings, and throwing them into lakes or burying them for the purposes of choking off the oxygen. They've decided now that the Chinese, I think, are handing their you-know-what to them in Indonesia, and their operating costs, I believe, are probably $7 to $7.50 a pound. They needed to find a way to lower their cost base, and that was the idea, was to go back and scavenge these nickel, copper, cobalt values. Well, a funny thing happened along the way. We found that after the bioleaching is completed and everything's in solution, if you add ammonia, either liquid or gas, ammonia acts as a repellent to iron. It's almost like putting two magnets together. So it repels the magnetite, which can be recovered and sold as green steel or green iron, basically, for the green steel industry. And from what we've seen so far, it meets the purity levels that are needed to do so. The other thing we found is that the ammonia has a liking for sulfur, and so they band together, and then through a series of reductions, you produce a crystallized form of ammonia sulfate fertilizer for the agricultural industry. You also precipitate out your base metals as sulfates, like a copper sulfate, et cetera, leaving you with silica or sand that can be used for paste backfill. It can be used in geopolymers. The Australians are doing a lot a lot in that world. But effectively zero waste. Now, when you think about 80 billion tons of tailings that are sitting on surface globally, as well as adding 10 to 12 billion tons a year from current processing, you theoretically may never dig another iron ore pit in the world. You wouldn't have to. There's got to be billions of tons of iron sitting there waiting for reclamation. Now, unlike the gold, where you have more control over an asset that produces superior numbers, we're going to continue to pursue those. As a matter of fact, I'm heading off to Peru next Tuesday to meet with Activos Mineros, which is the government's orphaned tailings division. So anything that through bankruptcies or whatever, these tailings are under the control of the government, and of course they're very keen to reprocess these tailings and remove the potential acid rock drainage. And of course, I'm going to be telling them about this zero tailings as well. So it focuses on the sulfide waste. And this is interesting too, because this technology could actually be retrofitted onto the back end of an existing mill. And you're basically getting value from two things that normally would be classified as long-term liabilities. And that would be the iron and the sulfur. Remarkably, what we found out was that 75% of the value of 1 ton of this waste comes from the fertilizer and the iron. Only 25% of the value comes from the nickel, copper, and cobalt. We found that quite shocking. Now, that's just on that particular pyrrhotite waste that we were working on. It obviously all depends on the grade of the metals contained and any other factors, because nothing is ubiquitous. So by virtue, though, of diversifying ourselves away from mining, because we're now actually partaking in, as a supply chain company, in the steel making business or in the fertilizer making business, it tends to give us a little bit more of a buffer from metal prices, to tell you the truth. So there's many metals you can go after here. It's not restricted just to nickel, copper, cobalt. It could be used on rare earths as well, gold, etc. We're even playing around with arsenopyrite to see if there's something that we can do with the arsenic on the back end, as opposed to turning it into a ferric arsenate. One of the biggest costs in the current present technology is, of course, the limestone. We use a lot of limestone, and that adds a lot of volume to what's produced at the back end, although it's benign. That little third slide here is effectively, that's what you call a desktop study that we've been doing at Merarco. We've done that already with this technology, and we're now going up into a pilot plant that's just been recently opened by Merarco for roughly $10 million. So we'll be running a pilot test for the balance of this year, predominantly tweaking and looking for cheaper ways of doing it, different reagents, et cetera. But once that is done, and if we're happy with the results, then we'll go on to a demonstration plant. I can say that we are getting inquiries now from the usual suspects, I guess is the best way to put it. We've been doing some work in Asia through some test work that we're about to start there as well, all of which will become public at some point in time. But originally we were kind of disappointed that the reaction to our release was quite muted, but now it's changed, and now we're starting to hear from people that actually can write some big checks, which is nice. It's the complete opposite of what we're experiencing in Ecuador right now. Okay, so people always ask about scalability. Can the technology be scaled up? Because that's where many technologies fail. And the simple answer is that bioleaching is what we do, and what we're doing is we're marrying it to technologies that already exist. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's 100%, but we take comfort in the fact that we're not really, making everything we've done before is going to be done again, just on a much larger scale. And to put it in perspective, these plants are much more costly and much bigger than they are for the gold recovery circuit. you're looking at plants here because the tailings in size alone, some of these are 200 and 300 million tons. You don't want to spend 50 years reprocessing it. So you need capacity, and you need to scale up these tanks to a size where they can handle, big volumes. We're talking capital probably in the 500 million range. And it's for that reason that we will not be developing these projects ourselves, but we will license the technology and get a royalty for as long as that plant operates. That way you can have multiple plants being built globally by different groups. And that's really what has to be done here. You need speed to get going, and you need capacity. So from the miner's perspective, of course, I know, for example, that we talked to somebody recently that's got a $250 million environmental bond sitting there. They'd like to get that out of there. And the bottom line is the only way that's going to happen is if you completely replace the tailings with nothing. And of course, you're also, opening up that land for future use now that's been, buried under, hundreds of millions of tons of tailings. Again, if you strap it on the back end of an existing operation, you're going to start to see lower costs because you're actually getting paid for two things that used to be liabilities. They're now assets. Obviously, this technology is aligned to green financing and government remediation funds. The hardest part is just getting in the door to find the right person to do so. So, in some countries where they don't produce steel or they import fertilizer, this is kind of a neat way for them to, I guess, limit their imports, of fertilizers and the like. So the next steps, as I mentioned, the pilot will continue. We'll be retuning the development flow sheet over the course of the year, designed for the demonstration plant. And a demonstration plant is going to cost probably in the $40 to $50 million range. But obviously, the long-term effects or benefits are huge compared to that. And it's almost a point where the first company that comes in with the checkbook is probably going to get the best deal for future processing. And then I mentioned there, of course, about the scale up, et cetera, and licensing and royalties. There's just a schematic of how it works, which is pretty basic. And effectively another schematic just showing what the breakdown of pyrrhotite, what it falls into. And finally, Peru, as I mentioned, I'm heading there next week. What's of interest to us there is energite, which is effectively the sulfide mineral that has gold, silver, copper, and arsenic. And again, the prices paid by the Chinese are just brutal. So our job there is to talk to the 28 processors that exist in Trujillo, because they're the ones that are buying all the rock from the miners, crushing, grinding, and floating it, and then selling the concentrates to the Chinese. And all we have to do is outbid the Chinese. At the same time, though, we're going to start looking at tailings, because one of the biggest problems, as you know, in Ecuador is that we don't have an asset underlying the bioleach plant outside of the land and the plant. So hopefully there would be a lot more financeable by owning something that we can get literally for free from the government, because they're more interested in getting the problem cleaned up. So we've got 237 million shares outstanding, et cetera, et cetera. We're still a tiny minnow. And we sit there and churn paper like crazy. And it's frustrating, to say the least. And that's my presentation. So now I'm going to head over here to these. Okay. Questions? How close are we to wrapping up the financing for the Tenguel project? Efforts have been underway for years. Are there truly viable near-term prospects? And the answer is yes. I mean, we're talking to different groups every day. Again, perception tends to be reality sometimes, and that's tough to fight when they open up a newspaper and that's what they see. The world seems to be compartmentalizing resource access and ownership. How does this impact BacTech? Does it create additional incentive to invest in BacTech? Or are these regionalization policies a risk factor? Wow, that's quite a question. I'm sorry, I really don't know what you mean by compartmentalizing resources. Maybe you can write that note, and I'll come back to that. What about soil contamination? No, there's nothing, because we produce a ferric arsenate, which is a US EPA landfillable form of arsenic. And we use a conventional tailings pond just to put the waste that we generate, but there's really nothing in it. There's no sulfides. This is the only venture BacTech does, ? Well, I've just sort of walked through everything. As I mentioned, we are in discussions with different groups on the new patent side. But right behind Ecuador, if we can get the thing financed, we could easily build a plant in Peru. Maybe before in Peru, I don't know. I mean, it's, but there's a lot of value out there. There are a lot of places where this arsenic has caused a lot of problems, and we're the answer to cleaning it up. Which product do you see as the largest value driver near term, and if you had any offtake discussions yet? I would say that the near-term value comes from Ecuador once financed, and yes, we've been discussions. We've been offered an offtake subject to us raising the capital to build the plant, and we would need that for working capital anyways. Okay, hang on here. How many commercial discussions are underway, and in what regions or commodities? Well, numerous discussions are underway, and they go anywhere from Europe to North America to South America. Mining is a global beast. If you obtain the patent, can you then assign a value to it and use it to strengthen the balance sheet, and in turn to use it to help secure financing in Ecuador? I would say that the value, if the patent is issued, I think the value of the stock increases, which might allow us to maybe look more at an equity raise, assuming the price of the stock has reacted accordingly. We've spoken to the accountants about getting a valuation done, but they just said, look, you can't put that on your balance sheet. You just can't. But you can tell people that you've had an independent evaluation done of the technology and it's worth X dollars. With roughly a $10 million market cap and 49% insider strategic ownership, how are you balancing the need for growth capital and the risk of over dilution for current shareholders? Well, we're fortunate in the sense that we had 100,000 shares of Silver Crown that we've been selling in the marketplace for that reason alone, to raise capital to service our monthly payout. And knowing that we still have another 300,000 shares of it coming to us in the event we get Ecuador financed and up and running. So that was quite beneficial for us. If anybody doesn't know, the shares went to $25 recently, and I was actively selling between 15 and 25. Is there a possibility of moving ahead with a project in Peru instead of Ecuador? If so, why? The answer is yes. And because, as I mentioned earlier, we can get our hands on some assets for literally nothing, which we can't do in Ecuador. And so it would be nice to have something that you could offer a lender as a fallback position. And they're probably going to be gold, silver, copper tails. What 2 to 3 key milestones people should watch for over the next 6 to 12 months? Obviously, the biggest one will be Ecuador, because that makes this project, but you can start doing the math. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. What we need to know is what we're going to own, of course, at the end of the day. And, but once you're financed, you're probably 12 to 14 months of production, and then you're in business. And then we start right on phase 2. And I believe that is it, and I'm just about out of time. Oh, sorry, here's one. Have you begun negotiating any long-term concentrate? We know who the first 5 suppliers are, and fortunately for us, we didn't sign a contract with any of them. We have MOUs, And that's predominantly because of the fact it's taken us so long to get the financing done that we'd probably be in court right now. So we know they're interested. We know that they're frustrated dealing with the Chinese, and that's the way it is. So I think that's it.